didn't know. I didn't know. Welcome, everybody, to another edition Tackle Shop Live. What's up, Keith Howard? Mike Hayer, how you doing? Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Tackle Shop Live. We are so happy to be here tonight. I am Mike Acord. I am with George Acord. And down on the end there, back in action, Corbin CG Gottwalt is in the house.
Resurrected, man. I resurrected.
Right on. And as always, cameraman Nick's here. What's up, Nick? Nick's here. I'm sorry, Nick, I had you turned off. What's up, brother?
I'm doing good. How's everybody else doing out there?
We love you, brother. We love you. I didn't mean to turn you down.
You side-turned me.
Yeah. Man, it's good to see everybody stopping in. Stephen Daniel, how you doing? Rusher Fuller. Byron, what's up, buddy? Andre, how are you, pal? Good to see everybody. Michael McCabe. Matt Rubo from over there on the YouTube side of things. There's another YouTube guy. Emmett, what do you say, Emmett? And Connor McLaughlin, how you doing, buddy? Robert Donahue. Ken Hodgins, back in old school, back in the shop. How you doing, Kenny? Spiros, how you doing? Man, we got a great show for you guys tonight. I don't know if you've been following along, but we've been had our big launch of the Uncle Josh pork, which is back in action, back in the shop, and it's been several years since they produced it. It's back. It looks better than ever, and we're really excited about it. So we thought, well, the pork's in the house. Let's do a jig show. We're going to talk about pork and what it's meant to us over the years and how we used it over the years. And then we're going to get into, jig fishing, what we're doing now with jigs, how we're going to use our pork, how we're going to use some of this stuff that, and what we're doing and some things that we're doing different. We're going to talk about that tonight. And, we got a whole lot of stuff going on here. So John Snook, how you doing, buddy? Yeah. So, I guess the place to start here is kind of the history lesson.
Oh, I was in class all day, bro. Take me to some more school.
Test Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna. Yep. I dug up some information on Uncle Josh and where it got started, and actually where the pork bait got started. And question to you is, where was it started and why was it started? Does anybody have that?
Yeah. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, at the pig farm, because George needed a trailer to go to his first classic.
Ah.
Well, wasn't it like in the Midwest, like in Illinois?
No, it was created by Alan Jones and Urban Schreiner. Alan Jones and Urban Schreiner
From like Illinois.
They were World War I vets, and they fished. They were fishing black bass in, largemouth and smallies and stuff, but mostly largemouth up in northern Wisconsin in 1920. And these guys were up there, and back then they used live frogs, but they were catching so many damn fish they used all the frogs up. They couldn't get frogs. They couldn't catch frogs to use anymore. I mean, so
Good thing they didn't know about frog legs.
they created a pork frog when they couldn't catch any more of these frogs. They created a pork bait that looked like a frog.
White with green dots.
Yeah, Well, that we're going to get there. So that's why that's how it got
I
started.
keep jumping ahead.
That's how it got started. It got started by these two guys who were killed all the frogs in Wisconsin, and then they ran out of frogs, so they decided, yeah, there we go.
There she is, Nick.
But the actual style of the frog, the original frog, was actually a frog style. It looked like a frog. They stamped it out of the pig belly.
Look at all that briny goodness.
They
Looks
carved.
juicy.
Yeah, back in the 20s, they carved the frogs out of the pork rind, and they were so successful using this thing because it didn't stop their catches. They were just smashing fish on this thing. They weren't depleting the whole nature up in
Plus, they weren't taking out the
Wisconsin.
whole frog community.
They weren't killing all the frogs anymore and making them stink. So this worked so well, they decided to take it to market. The company, and how'd they get the name Uncle Josh, George? Anybody know how they got the name Uncle Josh?
I can only imagine that the guy that used to thump them in the boat every time they went fishing was their old Uncle Josh.
Well, you're close, but the company was named after a farmer on Jordan Lake who reminded
In North Carolina?
Let's see. I think it's set up here somewhere. I think it was. I think they were traveling around. I think these guys were travelers.
Wow.
And he reminded them, Alan and Urban, of a favorite character that they used to know named Uncle Josh.
Okay.
So that's how they got
in
the
honor
name.
of Uncle Josh.
Yep. So it was this guy who they had this character
That's awesome.
that they used to know, and they always called him Uncle Josh. And I don't think it was his name, but that's what they called him, Uncle Josh.
Right.
So they named the company after somebody they were calling Uncle Josh. At that time, Alan's day job was on a farm where he butchered pigs and packaged sausage, which meant there were no shortage of fatbacks for the making of lures. So
my man was a sausage packer.
He was, and he was taking good care of those. He was taking complete care of those fatbacks when he was butchering them because he didn't want to mess them up for the product. So he always had high quality fatbacks to work with. Yeah. So when they first started, they were sold in green and white.
Yeah, well, it was
No, in green or white.
Not with the dots.
Nope. Before World War II. However, after the war, better dyes came along, and then they started doing some other stuff. Now they might have did the dots back then too, George.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
it didn't break it down.
Sure they did.
But they had to dye green, and they had to dye, and they had white.
Yeah.
So they were able to dye it.
Rit.
Huh?
Rit
dye.
No doubt.
And the pork is put through a 2-week-long curing process before getting cut and dyed. The pork is packed in a brine to keep them from spoiling and remaining supple. Because if you take pork out, Nick, its original problem with pork was, you're a young dude, so you probably never even used the stuff. But the problem with it, you'd put it on there and then you'd hang it off the side of the boat, and you'd be fishing. My pork, and you go back to get your pork, and it was all curled up and nasty and dried up, and I'm telling you,
that, sir, is why you weren't much of a jig fisherman.
And let me tell you something. If you ever had a problem, and you guys can chime in here, but if you guys ever had a problem getting something off a hook, try to get off a dried up pork rind off your hook. I mean, knives and scissors, and I mean, you needed everything to get it off.
And Mike, I was just going to say, because I remember some summer days at Raystown, it would get so hot and you'd forget that pork on your jig. And like you said, you literally broke hooks to try to get that stuff off.
It was horrible, man. It was absolutely horrible. So you definitely had to keep an eye on it. There's like some of the gulp,
yes,
that we had the problem with the gulp.
It's kind of acted like pork.
It acted just like pork, and that's what we always said. We were like, "Oh my god, this stuff's like pork," and everybody's, a lot of people were like, "What? What are you talking about?" Well, now big problem with that. So yeah, Troy Rink's here. How you doing, Troy? Gary Kalick, what's up, Gary? Long time no see, brother. Mark Poloski's in the house, and Mark just won the Victory Fishing Rod. So of course he's going to be hanging in here to give us some love.
Congrats, Mark.
That's a big win.
Beyond Fishing's here. How you
Huge.
doing, buddy? The pork was packed in the brine to keep it from spoiling and remaining supple. The company grew to offer many different baits, but the most popular bait was the what, George?
Number 11 chunk.
Number 11 pork frog was their number one bait to this day. Still the number one bait. So of course they brought it out, and they brought out the number 11 as their first, one of their first offerings was the number 11.
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, when the manufacturers tried to replace it with plastic,
yeah,
their very, very first ever chunks
yeah, that's it.
are shaped exactly like pork. So let me get this pork out of here.
Hey, George, take a little hit off that brine there.
I was wondering if he was going to eat it.
Take a little. It has to be good.
It's kind of salty.
It has to be good.
Reminds me of a margarita.
5 o'clock somewhere.
So here you have
Drink
the
up,
pork,
boys.
and you notice that's the fat side, okay? And that's the hide, the rind, okay? Now this new pork is this is the new version. This is kind of like Kobe pork. I mean, this stuff is massaged, refined.
It is.
I mean,
Kobe pork.
this is now this color here I have is
Black.
black. I didn't know if I got the black and blue or not, but that's the black. And you'll notice that the chunk, the first chunk that came out in the plastic, which Zoom started,
Yeah,
is shaped exactly like the pork.
yeah.
Okay. That's not by accident. But I mean, there's just no comparison to the feel of the pork. Now this bad boy catches some fish too.
Yeah.
Let's not get in that pissing contest, but there she is. She's back.
Yeah. So the company was forced to stop making pork a few years ago due to supply issues with getting the quality fat back. See, that was the problem. It wasn't that they couldn't get fat back. It was the quality stuff that they needed. They couldn't get enough of it.
You mean when they stopped making pork?
Yeah.
Too bad they didn't figure out who uses wild boars and stuff running around down there.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be a great way to make pork trailers. You know, get on a helicopter.
Uncle Josh,
And be like, we got your
Pork
factory loaded, bro.
Uncle Josh, pork frog wild boar series.
Yes. Yes.
Unlimited quantity down there.
I know.
And I'd leave the hair on them suckers too, man.
Yep.
So
Yeah, there was
so here's the deal here.
they had to stop stop manufacturing it because of the expense.
So that because of the quality fat back that the baits are cut from due to the pigs being butchered younger than ever before, rather than the 2 or 3 year old mark. They were butchering them a lot younger nowadays, and it's hard to get the good stuff. So it wasn't durable enough. It was breaking down quicker.
Plus the price had gone up really high.
And then the price got crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a couple of reasons for that, but that's a little history on the Uncle Josh pork and where it came from, and the idea that it was by these 2 dudes up in Wisconsin in 1920, you know, killing all the frogs up there. So that was a great. I mean, it was great that these guys figured that out. I mean, you always say, how would they figure that out? Well, this guy was a butcher. And he was like looking at this rawhide. He was going, I could make something out of that.
What's that saying? The necessity is the father of all inventions.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool stuff right there. And a couple of things, Nick, before we get really rolling here on the jig program. That was just kind of like a pork history lesson.
Good stuff, Mike.
Yeah. And Caitlin helped me with that, of course.
I knew that wasn't your writing.
No, that's Caitlin. Caitlin helped me with that. So thank you, Caitlin. Smallmouth Saturday's back, Nick.
I can't freaking wait.
Smallmouth Saturday is back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're making the announcement here. We are going to do Smallmouth Saturday, February the 12th. Now, for everybody who hasn't been to Smallmouth Saturday, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's all about smallmouth. We're not talking anything else. We're talking smallmouth. We're talking about all kinds of smallmouth fishing. We're going to have 3 or 4, probably 5 seminars that we're going to run throughout the day. Myself, George, and Corbin are going to do one, and then I'm trying to get another special guest to come in also and do another one. But we're going to have at least 4 great seminars on different topics. Not, it's going to be all different stuff that we're going to do. And everybody loved it so much the first 2 years we did it that we do it 2 years or 3 years.
2 years.
2 years. And then COVID hit.
And then the vid.
Yeah. So everybody loved it so much because you knew what you were getting. You were coming in here.
Yeah.
You knew. And then the other thing that we do and that I personally do is I invite everybody to come.
Right.
Like I invite all the local smallmouth junkies. Like we'll invite all the guides. All the guides will be here walking around. If they want to come, they're welcome to come. We're going to invite everybody. Everybody who just can come. I put the invite out to them and have them here so that they can talk to you guys and you can pick their brains on a one-to-one basis. Like it's always what it's about. But then you can also sit in on some really cool seminars and hopefully learn something from that. And again, it's, what we do here is we want to help you guys, our customers, catch more fish from what we've learned over the years and what we're continuing to learn. We just constantly want to pass it on to you guys. So Smallmouth Saturday, get it on your calendar. It's going to be February the 12th, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. of solid bronzeback love.
And Mike, you know what one of my favorite things about Smallmouth Saturday is like during those seminars that we've done for the years is the one-on-one attention to detail and questions that people ask. I mean, a lot of people they'll ask all kinds of different scenarios, questions, baits, And again, this event is put on for you guys. And so come on in, pick our brains. Shop's absolutely loaded with tackle. Yep. And we're gonna tell you the latest and greatest we've been doing, and all the cards are on the table for Smallmouth Saturday. Always,
as always, we're gonna have some great specials lined up for you guys to take advantage of. We're gonna have whatever. George is working on that right now, so he's gonna have some great specials available. There's gonna be some great buys. There's gonna be some great times, and hope to see you guys there. Mark on your calendar, February 12th. So Jack Hinkle's here. How you doing, buddy?
Jack Hinkle never misses Tackle Shop Live.
No, William Barnes is here.
There's Oz.
Clifford Ruck.
What up, Oz?
Oz is always stopping in. Dean Resch, how you doing, buddy? So we have a lot of great people here stopping in that always stop in, and we appreciate it very much. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them tonight. We'll try to do our best to help you out with some of this stuff. But we're going to get on to our jig show. And we're going to get jiggy with it.
We're getting jiggy with it. Nah. Oh, sorry.
Well, we've talked about jigs a bunch of times in our show, and we talked about finesse jigs. We talked about catching smallmouth on jigs, but we just want to kind of do an overview of and kind of get into the nuts and bolts of jig fishing, what it's about, the kind of jigs that you should have in your box and when to use them. So there's some tips and some stuff that we're going to talk about here that you might want to keep an ear peeled, because you're going to get some different opinions here on some jig fishing. Jig fishing has been around for how long, George? Ever
since before them boys were making frogs out of pork.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed, when you talk to all the people that we get the chance to talk to on our travels, which is pretty cool. We're lucky to talk to all the pros that we bump into, is they're always throwing jigs, constantly always throwing jigs. These guys always have a jig tied on. They never go to anywhere without having a jig on. Even if it's a smallmouth lake or whatever, they're always constantly throwing jigs, period.
Yeah, I mean, if you do nothing else as a bass fisherman, you should master the jig. I mean, if you literally did nothing but fish the jig in every form that it's available to you, you would be one of the best fishermen in your group, in your club, on your tournament circuit. I mean, that's how powerful the jig is. And you don't have to get, crazy. You don't have to have, cult-like jigs. I mean, a basic jig,
cult-like jig,
3/8, half ounce flipping type jig,
well,
a finesse jig,
the
a couple other jigs in your arsenal and master them.
Yeah.
And with some of the tricks we're going to throw your way.
And Nick, one of the things that we say when we're in here in the shop talking with customers is, we talk about all these different techniques, Carolina rigging, drop shot, and swim baits, tubes, Ned rigs. But if you master the jig and the feel of the jig and understanding the feel of your jig and understanding what your jig's doing and the bottom contact and the what the tree limb feels like, what a piece of grass feels like, what all this stuff feels like, then when you apply it to all this other techniques that we talk about, it's just the same thing, just adding a different bait to it. It's all the same feel. So that's how important jig fishing is. It's a great learning tool to learn bottom touchy baits, all that stuff, what your bait is doing and the different feels that are out there. That's very, very important.
I agree.
Yeah.
And, Mike, I want to ask you this question because I think we are all going to have the same type of response. When you're going to get into jig fishing, this is one of the areas that you do or do not skimp on the rod that you buy and sensitivity wise.
No, I mean, that's one, that's another thing we say, and we've talked about this many times is, when you're doing the bottom bouncing, touchy feely type of stuff, you want to get the best quality equipment that you can possibly afford because this is where you're going to use it, not with a spinner bait, not with a buzz bait, not with a topwater lure, not with a bunch of different things, but this is where you're going to really want to spend that extra money to get that touchy feely because that's what you're doing. You're in the junk. You're trying to detect a strike within the brush pile, within the timber, within the grass patch or whatever that you're fishing. So
I would say probably your most versatile jig rod would be between 7 and 7.3. Heavy power, fast to extra fast taper. That doesn't really matter. That's going to be your most versatile all around jig rod. I mean, that's going to let you do everything from pitching a jig, flipping a jig, casting a jig, dragging a football head, skipping a jig. I mean, it's just swimming a jig. It's just that one rod, that's 7 to 7.3, heavy power, fast to extra fast taper, spooled up with a high speed reel. This is a situation where you want to look into an 8 ratio reel and 15 to 20 pound line, fluorocarbon,
right?
And you're good to go jig fishing. If you don't have an 8 reel, no big deal. Use one of your reels in the 7 range.
Yep.
It's just the faster the reel, the better for jig fishing because you're constantly picking up slack. And that higher ratio, more inches per crank, really makes a difference in the jig fishing world.
Yeah.
Well, and George, if you're on a big time flipping bite where you're flipping a jig, you are going to get more casts in during the day because you're going to reel on, your slack or your excess line a little bit faster with a higher speed reel. I mean,
covering water is a big thing.
May overlook.
Jerry Ray, and this is a question we get a lot. I'm not going to pick on you here, Jerry, but we always get that. Like guys are picking up jigs and they throw them and they're not catching fish on them. One of the biggest problems that we find with a lot of guys who say that is they don't commit to it enough, because we all limited. We all got limited time. And
Right.
what do you want to do when you go fishing?
Catch fish.
You want to catch fish. So the jig isn't always your best bet for catching fish. Although if you stick with it all day long, you're going to catch some fish and you're going to catch a nice fish. But it's not the bait that always works. So what happens is you go out there, like, I'm going to catch a fish on a jig today. And you flip it 10 minutes and your buddy's up in the front of the boat throwing a Ned rig and he catches like 8, 12-inch fish. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm getting my ass beat. Like, I got to ride home with this freaking guy. You know what I mean? And it's just not. And what do? You put the rod down,
You pick up,
and then you pick up the spinning rod with a Ned rig or a small finesse worm, and you go back to catching fish. And and I'm not saying you're not going to catch big fish on it, because we know we do catch big fish on it, but that's what happens. You don't give a bait, and I can say that to guys that come in and say, "Hey, I throw a Ned rig and I can't catch anything on it. I throw a crankbait and I can't catch anything," because you don't spend the time with it. So I'm not picking on you, Jerry, per se, because we all do it. We just don't spend enough time to have success with it, to build the confidence to throw it all the time.
Here's the facts on jig fishing. So just to help you a little bit here, Jerry, and everyone like you that struggles with the jig or does not have confidence in a jig or does not. So when you say things like, I don't have confidence in a jig, that just tells me that you pretty much don't fish a jig. Or I don't do well with a jig. What's going wrong? Well, you're not fishing a jig. You're not going to do well with it if you're not fishing it.
Yeah.
So, the jig, the thing about it is, Jerry, it's going to catch fish every single day of the year. There's not very many lures that you fish with that will catch fish every single day of the year. And in many cases, will catch the biggest fish of the day. And in many cases, will be the best choice of lure for the day. So it's kind of an important thing. I mean, we've done, I don't know how many jig fishing shows, and you can't do it enough because not everybody's seen your show on it, A. B, there's new twists and turns. You can't cover everything in an hour. So it's something that we like to bring back and talk about because we pretty much live with a jig or two tied up and in the water all the time, as most of you do as well. So, sit back, Jerry and crew, and we're going to go through, the 101 process here, the basics of jig fishing. We're going to differentiate between some styles, but we're really going to talk about, casting and pitching and flipping a jig to some form of cover. And there is differences. There is differences. We're going to talk about that as well.
Yep.
And get you in the right frame of mind, get you that confident, feeling to go into 2022 and become, harness your inner Denny Brower.
Yeah. So,
you know what I'm saying?
So what's interesting, like for anybody
yeah.
that's out there, I mean, you have a lot of viewers and listeners that don't know much about jig fishing. But when you guys said you were going to talk about jig fishing today, I got so excited because if you told me I could only bring one box anywhere in this country,
yeah,
I would take my jig box just because you can hit every section of the water column with it. And I just believe it catches them everywhere. And not many other lures can really say that.
No,
like George said.
not.
Yeah.
So let's get into this. Let's talk about the weights of jigs first. And I have like a list here I want to kind of go down. But before we get going, one big thing that I want to make sure you guys understand is the KISS rule. Keep it simple, stupid. That's a big thing when it comes to jig fishing. Yeah, it's keep it simple. I heard that so many times from so many people, how they catch them on a green pumpkin jig, or they catch them on a black and blue jig. They catch them on a straight black jig. There's not you don't necessarily need to have a million colors of jigs. Yeah, there's times where you're going to want a shad pattern. There's times you're going to want a bluegill pattern, but pretty much outside of that,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? So that's the big thing. And also in weights, you're going to keep it pretty simple. You're not going to go crazy on the weights. This is what's nice about jig fishing. You can keep it really simple. So as far as weights go, George and Corbin and Nick, if you had to pick weights to use, what would be like your main couple of weights that you should have?
What I would do is I would kind of break down what the real world's like with different jig weights. So if you have a 1/4 ounce flipping jig, with a small to medium sized trailer on it, and you're fishing it on 15 to 20 pound line, that jig's really only useful in 0 to 4 feet of 5 feet of water at the most, with very little wind or current. It's great in that shallow situation. It's also great if you're fishing on top of like shallow grass. Let's say you're in a tidal water fishery and you have a high tide and you want to swim a jig on top of that grass. So the 1/4 is probably not your most versatile. However, I would say, realistically, I always have a half a dozen 1/4 ounce jigs in my box. The real meat and potato jig is going to be your 3/8, because it will do everything the 1/4 will do, except for some of that super shallow stuff. And it will also do, a little deeper, a little more wind, a little more current. One of the things for you to think about is when you're pitching a jig on boat docks or lay down trees, a lot of those bottoms are silty. And if that jig falls down into that bottom and mucks itself down into that bottom, it really cuts back your opportunity to get a bite. So, if you're in super shallow water with a soft, muddy, mucky bottom, and you're flipping boat docks and you're flipping trees, that's the time to go to that 1/4 to that 3/8 ounce jig. Now, conversely, if you have really aggressive fish and you're getting bit on that fall, you can trigger that bite by going, even in that super shallow water, by going to a heavier jig, which we will talk about later. But usually speaking, that shallow, mucky bottom water, that little bit of lighter jig is going to prevent that jig from thumping down into that silt and muck and mire and reducing that. Most of your bites come all in the fall, but not all of them. And if your jig puffs down into that mud and disappears, it's been my experience that you're pretty much done.
Might as well reel it in
at that point.
Yeah.
So that's why your 3/8 is kind of your rock star there. Your 1/4's necessary. If you only could have one, would you guys agree it would be a half?
I agree.
If you're only allowed one,
Absolutely.
you're allowed one.
Depends on the style.
No,
It depends on the style.
no. I mean, I think a half ounce jig is an all around jig for everything. But
Well, the question was, if you're only allowed one,
yeah,
would you agree it would be a half ounce jig?
yeah, if that's the only jig I was allowed to have.
Yeah, because you'll get that fast fall to trigger a bite. You can also fish that 3 to 15 foot of water range with it. You can cast it on offshore cover in 15 to 20 foot of water. You can swim it pretty much in any circumstance there is. So I made an argument for 1/4. I told you that you have to have 3/8, but if you really need to have your half ounce game
Strong.
it set up.
And George, you asked that question. You said, one jig, but you didn't say one trailer.
No.
So you could
Right.
you could change that jig by just changing your trailer. which
Absolutely.
I'm sure you're going to go over it later.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. But if I could only have one jig, Nick, the half is way more versatile than the 3/8.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
The half will do everything the 3/8 will do, and the 3/8 cannot do what the half can do.
Yep.
So that's my thought
what's
process.
your theory
there.
on weights, Corbin? Like, what weights are you throwing a lot of?
3/8 and 3/4. So I don't throw half a lot.
Yeah.
And you know why I don't throw half a lot? Because everybody throws half. So for me, if I'm fishing 3/8, I can go with that. I can get the slower fall, maybe a bulkier jig, or I can trim it up and get the faster fall, which is something they're not going to see. And 3/4, I'm going to get a faster fall than the half ounce, so I have a chance to get a reaction bite. For me, it's all about the trailer. If I had to pick one all around, I think I'd pick 3/8 because if I'm fishing deeper water where I'm on a reaction bite, and especially if I'm fishing grass, I may be fishing another bait other than a jig. Maybe a worm or something else. But for me, I think 3/8 is my all around.
I think 3/8 is a good argument there also. But the thing I want to point out here is with weights, and the guys kind of touched on it here a little bit, is it's all on fall rate. The colder water, normally you're going to fish your lighter weights for that slower fall. You want that much slower fall. So early in the spring, late winter, early spring, that spring bite, you want that nice slower fall. So you're going to use more of the lighter jigs that time of year anyway. So that's the big thing with that. And then as it warms up, your other weights for reaction bites. Now we'll start talking about reaction bites. Your summertime hot water situations. Then is when the reaction bite comes in. Then you're going to get into the 3/4 ounce, that heavier side of things, where you want that real fast fall in front of the fish just to generate strikes. And that's what you're trying to do, generate those strikes. So that's the time of year you're going to use those heavier ones, more so than in the early spring.
Well, and it depends on the depth.
Yeah, we're talking like if fish are coming up.
I mean, if you're a shallow water guy,
they're moving up.
If you're fishing, if you're a shallow water, under 10 foot of water guy, 5.
I don't find
average.
I don't find flipping jigs and that kind of stuff a deep water jig. I'm talking a shallow water presentation here, which is what most people are doing with these jigs. Is they're fishing docks, shallow docks, and they're
couple
flipping
trees,
where these fish are moving up on rock in the early part of the year, or that kind of stuff. Typically speaking, the 3/8 stuff is you're going to be done in the winter.
And
one thing
this
guy, he ain't allowed to watch anymore.
He's out.
Yeah, he gone.
One thing that's nice too, guys, about these jigs as they came along, when people think of a 3/4 ounce jig, they're thinking of a huge ball of a jig.
Right.
And with some of the advancements now with these jig companies, that's not necessarily the case all the time. You can get a smaller profile jig now in a 3/4 or a 1/2 ounce.
Sure.
And all
you can go to a tungsten head.
Yep.
And get that smaller profile. And there is some, I mean, for not getting mired down here on this weight thing, there is some advantage to 3/4 and 1 ounce jigs. If you are a grass fisherman,
yes,
and I'm talking to all you guys up north in our beloved dreamland that we love to fish up on Lake Champlain and all those awesome flipping lakes up north, I would venture a guess that those guys spend more time with a 3/4 ounce jig in their hand than they do with anything else. Because when you're flipping grass clumps in 6 to 8 foot of water, which is what you typically do a lot of up north, you need a 3/4 to a 1 ounce jig.
Yeah.
So, depending on where you fish, you might have to rely on that. Your box might be a little more loaded on that 3/4 to 1 ounce weight. Pretty much 3/4 will get. You can flip pretty thick grass, and you can flip pretty thick clumps in 6 to 8 foot of water with a 3/4 ounce jig. Pretty good. I've done it for most of my life, and I very rarely use an ounce.
Well, look at those guys that go to Florida, that are fishing those heavy hyacinths and all that stuff. They're using that 1 ounce jig too.
Well, they're using
different.
A specialty jig,
right? But
they're using a double weed guard, really heavy duty jig.
But it's a heavy jig.
Yeah,
it's a heavy jig.
It's a specialty jig,
right?
Yep.
So you have that on both sides. The other thing is a weed guard situation here, where when you get into this shallow water cover fishing. If you guys are out there and you're, one thing that is happening is it's easy to use the wrong jig in the wrong situation. You can go where you're flipping wood and you're flipping cover and you're getting hung up a lot. You don't have the right jig. You got a jig that doesn't have a heavy enough weed guard. I can't emphasize enough looking at these weed guards and using the right weed guard for the right situation. Because it's frustrating, a lot of guys who say that, man, I have a lot of problem catching fish on jig. They throw in a tree and they're getting hung up all the time. Well, there is a lot of jigs on the market. Greg Hackney's jig is one of them that has the heavier duty weed guard to keep your hook from hanging up.
Well, not only that,
I only learned that a few years ago, Nick.
not only that, the weed guard, as Mike points out, is very, very critical. But when you're flipping hard cover, and I'm talking wood, and I'm talking rock, the angle of the line eye is the most important thing on the entire jig. Okay, so these are 60-degree eyes. Want me to bring them in closer, Nick?
That's like an Arky style. That's what the Arky style was based on.
Yeah, so this bottom head here is a true Arky style head.
Yep.
Okay, so for those of you who are, Nick, I'm going to drop this one for a second. For those of you who are not up on your jig terminology, or if you're new to this jig game, I'm going to move this around a little bit, Nick. This is what is known as an Arky style head. This is the head that revolutionized jig fishing, changed jig fishing, and arguably is the most important jig head shape to this day.
To this day, yeah.
If you're building a modest jig box, but an effective jig box, focus heavily on the Arky style head with the 60-degree line eye. And by 60-degree line eye, just perpendicular to the hook shank, it's coming up at a 60-degree angle. That angle and this proper weed guard, okay, which we're going to go over the proper trimming of later, is critical for coming through wood and rock. Absolutely critical. If you don't have that style of eye, angle,
it's frustrating.
You have got the wrong
It's
jig.
frustrating. A lot of us struggle with that, and we get hung up a lot. And even if you look at the Greg Hackney jig, you know, his is the same thing. I don't know, you won't see it in there, but his is the same way as the one George held up. It's real thick. It's a thick brush guard, and it's stiff. It's very stiff, so it helps you from your point from getting in there and creating all these problems. So he's opening it up here. But that's the thing, isn't it, Corbin?
Yeah.
If you don't have success getting through the cover, I mean, it's very much a patience game thing, but you really got to have the right equipment to do it. And that heavy duty, and this is a jig this is from a guy this is what he does.
Yeah. So this is a heavy cover jig.
And Greg Hackney is a jig man. This is his jig.
So when you're gearing up with a heavy cover jig, with a heavy rod, okay, you can't fish this jig on a light rod. You need a heavy.
You need that heavy.
You need a heavy power rod because you have a
whoop ass rod, right, Corbin?
Heavy.
Absolutely, brother.
There you go, Nick. That's a good focus. You got a heavy gauge hook, which is to minimize flex. I mean, he ain't flexing that hook, okay? You've got a heavy guard, to Mike's point. And it's interesting on Greg Hackney's jig, you don't even need to trim the weed guard because they've got them put at the right angle, at the right length. And then you've got a 60-degree eye hook, okay? This is a true, awesome, heavy cover jig.
Yep.
So, as your jig game grows, you're going to go from heavy cover jigs to a more what we would call a casting jig.
Mm.
And that's basically going to refer to a little bit of a lighter wire hook that you can manage on a little bit of a lower powered rod because you're not really in that thick stuff, right?
Yep.
But at first, focus on when you're starting to build this box, when you're starting to get specialized, at first focus on a little bit of a heavier hook, and a little bit of a heavier brush guard that you can trim.
Yep.
Right, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the questions
we call that a flipping jig.
We call that a flipping jig.
Yep.
Some of the questions coming in are that I like is like, does the skirt material play a big factor in your jig?
Yeah. Yep. Can I use an example?
Yeah.
So early season, pre-spawn, one of the most effective jigs on planet Earth for big fish.
The mop jig.
Yep. Is what's called a mop jig. Now, whoever asked that question, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but Here's an example of when skirt material plays. And what I want to do here is I want to expand on this for you. So this is and you do not trim this skirt. This big giant skirt, okay, does not get trimmed. This is made out of round rubber. This is not silicone, okay? Silicone behaves differently than round rubber. Round rubber it's available in very limited colors. So that's why silicone, you can see there's a couple strands of silicone in here for sex appeal.
Yeah.
But
I get along with that.
The meat and potatoes there is that round rubber. And what that round rubber does is it undulates in the water. So pre-spawn, these fish are moving up. They're feeding. What they're feeding on is big. Okay, none of the crawdads have hatched yet in the spring, in the early pre-spawn. None of the bait fish have spawned yet. So everything is what is a mature adult organism that they're eating. So crawfish, shad, bluegills, but they're all bigger, right? So the big burly mop jig, to your point on skirt material, yes, you need some mop jig for pre-spawn.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about
that's a good
how to trail that.
That's a good deal there with Corbin. What do you think a jig represents?
Anything. I mean, it can represent anything. It could be a crayfish, it could be a bluegill, it could be a shad, depending on the color.
What would you use them for mostly for, though?
Depends on the time of year and what I'm trying to mimic. And of course, that's going to be my answer. I'm not going to give a straight. I mean, a lot of crayfish. But
what would be your main forage that you would go after when you're picking up a jig?
Crayfish and bluegill.
Crayfish and bluegill.
I mean, those are the big things.
Yeah.
But to highlight that mop jig, I mean, that mop jig's a badass jig, man.
Mm-hmm.
And you fish it different than you do anything else. You fish it really slow and methodical. I mean, this isn't a jig that you're going to see offshore, like we call it stroking a jig where you're pumping it, letting it. No. I mean, this is something you're going to put a big bulky trailer on. You're just going to slowly drag it, almost like a football jig.
Yeah.
But it gets bit, man.
Yeah.
It gets bit.
They make a Strike King crawdad called a lobster or something.
Rage lobster. Yep.
They put that on the back of that thing.
Yep.
It's like, I mean, that freaking thing is like
it's the size of your hand.
It's huge.
It depends from where you live.
I used to use the
it depends from where you live.
Crawl.
Okay.
Well, I know, like over in one of our local lakes, man, they throw that mop jig with that big giant lobster.
Yeah, it depends from where you live. I mean, I would probably size down a little bit to a standard rage crawl, or let's say if you have another brand of crawl that you like, like let's say you're a net bait guy, the pack a crawl, not the baby pack a crawl. In other words,
right.
You get the point. Like, you don't want a super giant trailer unless you're just straight up hog hunting. But this jig does require a little bit of a full size trailer. So the rage crawl, the pack a crawl,
the chigger crawl,
the 4-inch chigger crawl.
Yep.
The bigger trailer.
The Z crawl.
Nate Summers is wondering what our opinion is on the new power bait jig. Well, it's a nice looking jig, but we haven't seen him yet.
Well, I'll tell you what, Nate, it's kind of like this. There's thousands of jig builders in this country, and every one of them turns out a primo product. I mean, you got these local mom and pop shops that build some of the finest jigs out there. You've got, brands A to Z that build, every imaginable type of jig that's out there. And Berkeley has made an attempt to get into that level. Okay. They've done jigs in the past, and they did not bring their proper game to the table, and they fizzed out. These are nice jigs. Pick a letter, pick a company that starts with that letter, and you're going to be able to get that same quality of jig.
Yeah.
Now
that's
pretty much the. They built a nice jig.
Yeah.
But did they build a better jig than Strike King or
Dirty
Greenfish
jig.
or Dirty Jig? No. Did they build a lesser jig than them? No. They built a good jig on par with that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
Right.
Ford versus Chevy.
Oz is asking why did the industry abandon living rubber for silicone?
Availability.
Availability was a big thing.
It only comes in like 4 colors.
Yeah.
It's short on supply. And, as fishermen, we are very creative on our colors, and a lot of times our colors make a difference. So to get into that next level of color match and color availability, we had to go to a different material, and silicone became that guy.
Yep.
That's why there's like 6 colors of living rubber, and there's 60,000 colors of silicone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good question here. What if I Chris Wiseman is asking, what if I like a spinning rod? Well, Chris, there's nothing wrong with that, man. That's why they make heavy action 7-foot spinning rods. They've got them, bro. And you can use them. Some guys just don't feel comfortable throwing bait casters, which obviously never came to the shop here and asked about bait casters, because we would take you out front and make you a master in 5 minutes, guaranteed. But that's okay. It's okay. They make heavy action. St. Croix makes a nice 7-foot heavy action spinning rod. That is fantastic. Who else makes some good ones? I think they all make some decent.
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
Chris, you need to just get off that and get onto a casting rod. And I'm going to tell you why. Let me finish my thought.
Okay.
So there's going to be 2 major advantages for you, Chris, for fishing a jig in the style of jig fishing that we're talking about. One is pinpoint accuracy on the cast. So an underhand pitch cast, also combined with some skipping skills, allows you to put this jig in places that you can't get to the accuracy level of with a spinning rod. 2, the ability to handle a 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon line.
You're not going to be able to do that on a spinning rod.
So your spinning reel,
not even a 12,
does not like that.
Doesn't.
And your 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon line is going to ruin your day.
You can do the braid.
You can do braid.
You can do braid.
Braid has some limitations on hardcover.
There is.
I would highly recommend, Chris, that you start thinking about
come here to the shop. We'll teach you.
Going down that path of the bait casting rod for this. Now, for your finesse jigging, your spinning rod's great. But again, from an accuracy standpoint of view and from a line management standpoint of view, the bait casting rod reigns supreme, in my opinion.
And George, I'm a person that up till about 10, 12 years ago, I was in Chris's shoes, throwing a spinning reel. What I can give him a pointer on, if he's going to keep doing the spinning, I would advise him to come in here and get the bait caster set up. But you're probably not going to go over a 3/8. If you're going over 3/8 ounce, you're exceeding the limits, I think, of what a spinning outfit's going to do with that jig. That's my opinion.
There is. I agree. I totally agree with George. I totally agree with him. But there's people that just will not do it.
Well,
and what I'm saying is you can use a spinning rod if you must.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially with a micro jig. Especially with a smaller jig.
Well, you could do a smaller jig, but even these bigger jigs, Corbin, with a 7-foot heavy spinning rod and 30-pound braid, look out. I'm coming at you.
Can I just say, I got 3 words for you guys. Bitches be jigging.
Yeah, just
he
be
does
jigging.
He does it all the time.
Yeah.
And Mike, to your point, like I said, I was throwing up to a 3/8 ounce.
There's just some old dogs that can't be taught.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you're going to do spinning, Mike, you do have to do the braid.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
You're going to need a 4,000 series reel.
Yeah.
I would go to 50-pound braid. I would not do 30. I would do 50-pound braid.
Well, you got the nice 40.
I'd do 50 on a 40 series reel.
Yeah.
And a 7-foot heavy. And what I would do here is I would actually look possibly at some light inshore rods.
Yes, exactly.
Something that's geared up for, having that extra bigger guide and that extra backbone for striper fishing or
there's lots of rods.
Redfish.
Quick question for you guys. If this guy that's using the spinning setup, which I'm sure there's more than one, if they were just going to use straight fluoro, Would you agree? Don't put anything like over 12
You
pound
can't-
floor.
Don't even put 10 on.
12
put
was
10.
terrible, dude.
12. Yeah.
I tried 12.
Don't do it.
I was in a pinch one time in a tournament down to Bay, and I just had this situation where, you know, I thought fluorocarbon was making a difference, and I put 12 fluorocarbon
It just sprung off.
on a 3,000 reel, and I pulled up on my first spot in the morning. I threw it out there. It was the most
No go.
awful situation I was ever in my life.
No
It was
go.
horrible. You can't do it.
No
So-
go.
So, and I'm not saying, all I'm saying is that I'm not saying spinning rod's good. I'm saying that you can do it if you have to. Like I said, we understand there's some people that just can't get it and they don't want to do it. So there is that setup, and that's exactly what we're talking about. A 40 size reel, a heavy action spinning rod, 50 pound or 40 pound braid, and then you guys can go flipping all you want and you'll do just
However,
fine.
I would like to say, don't do that.
Yeah. And anybody who has the problem of, I just can't do a bait caster, man, you're not getting taught right. You got to come here. We will teach you. We teach everybody who's new at it out front for 5 minutes. And you know what happens? You know what happens, Corbin?
Oh, I can do this.
I didn't know it was that easy.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was. I'd have done this years ago. We will help you, explain it to you. It's simple. You can learn.
You can do it.
Greenfish tackle, Sean Taylor. We
Well,
love greenfish
Oh
tackle.
man, we are greenfish tackle junkies.
Love the greenfish.
I mean,
tackle.
I got the Brandon Cobb all-purpose jig laying here. I got the crawl ball. I got the itty bitty. I mean, come on, dog.
Difference between a casting jig and a swim jig to a new guy.
You know what? It's kind of like when we used to put a finishing nail in our trick worms and wacky rig with them, and then all of a sudden somebody decided to call it a Nico rig. That's pretty much the difference. So, I mean, when we started fishing swim jigs, we took our flipping jig and we reeled it in. I mean, let's get real here. Now, as with the Nico rig, things evolve and things become tweaked because as fishermen, we're always looking to tweak and build a better mash trap. So, what's happened with the swim jig is we've gone to a little bit lighter of a weed guard.
Yeah.
And then we have two basic types of swim jig. We have kind of a standard swim jig that has a little bit of a lighter hook in it. And to your point, it would be something like you would call casting jig.
Yeah.
And then we have, old heavy-handed Greg Hackney out there, and I mean, what he said, what did he say? Batman or nothing, got nothing on me, or Godzilla ain't got nothing on me.
Yeah, 65-pound braid, man.
He's swimming, he's got his heavy wire hook to match his heavy tackle. So, again, you can take your standard flipping jig and swim it and do just fine. But
Yeah.
I'm going to bet once you start catching a few fish doing that, you're going to try to improve and you're going to get into some swim jigs. Okay. And we'll do another swim jig show. We did one not too long ago, and we'll do another
You want
one.
to hear my swim jig story?
Not again.
It's a real quick one. It's pretty cool. Many years ago, I didn't know anything about swim jig fishing, but I had my jig box with me, and I was fishing the Elite Series tournament down on Potomac River, and first one I ever fished Elite Series as co-angler. Sight is all hell. Went to the draw first thing in the morning, or I went to the draw. Guess who I draw? KVD.
The man?
KVD. I draw.
Lucky dog.
I couldn't get out of my chair until everybody left because I think I crapped my pants. But anyway, we get out there and we're fishing, me and Kevin, and I'm whooping his ass on a spinnerbait, man. It was like,
That's the favorite part of the story for you, isn't it?
I was whooping his ass on a spinnerbait. It was unbelievable.
And he's up there picking his teeth and not even worried.
I was throwing half-ounce War Eagle Gold Shiner, and I'm just jacking them. And so I sat down and I started watching because I had 7-8 pounds. You only had 3 fish. I had 7-8 pounds, and we're going around, and he kept saying, "Man, we got to throw a swim jig. We got to throw a swim jig." And I'm sitting there watching him, and he's just fishing this top water. Man, somebody's got to throw a swim jig. I said, "Well, I can't take it no more. I got to throw a swim jig." I don't even know what a swim jig is. I pick up my rod. It was a black and blue War Eagle jig, and it had a my favorite trailer, which is the Zoom
Ultra
Ultra
Vibe
Vibe
Speed
Speed Crawl in the back.
Speed chunk.
Or Speed Chunk. And I said to him, what do you think about this? He's like, anything will work. Just throw it out there. I said, what do you do? And he says, just throw it out there and reel it back. I said, I never did this before. This is totally like Greek to me. He's like, just throw it out there and reel it back. I said, well, let it get down in the grass. He said, just take the top of the grass and just reel it. He said, here, you're going to have to reel it pretty fast. I'm like, all right, bro. And I picked it up and I fired it. And this is no shit. I fired that thing out there. I start reeling this thing across the grass. First cast. Wham! First cast. I mean, I'm just reeling this thing like this. Wham! Man, I set the hook and I said, oh, hell, here we go, man. I bring it in. I swing it in the boat. I take it off. I throw it. I call out, and throw the fish back. And I'm like, well, he says, I'll see that again. If you do that again, I know what I'm doing. I fire out there. This is no kidding. I throw out there. Then bam, 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 wham! Set the hook. Another fish. I call out with that thing. That was my swim jig. Right after that, he says, yep, that's all I need to see. He opens up his rod locker, which had 75 rods in it. And he picked up 73 of them. And he pulled the one out from the bottom and went like this. Comes right out. I think I was more impressed about him getting that rod out of that rod locker than learning how to swim jig fish. He may just come right out of there. Me and you, Nick, will be in there.
Oh yeah.
Mike
20
would've
rods.
broken-
I don't know
Mike
how
would've
this-
broken 20 of them.
I don't know how this guide broke.
How do these rods get all tangled up like that?
20 rods would come out, Mike.
I know,
just
it'd
to
be
get
horrible,
one.
bro. Anyway, that's the swim jig story, and everybody can learn like I learned. They can learn it just by throwing it and trying it. But
So I got a question for you guys. So we went over, the different jigs, different sizes, different weights. But George, you got a massive pile of trailers over there
I do.
that not only are they different, you're going to explain all that, but you can also manipulate those weights a little bit with them.
I can do a lot of stuff with this trailer.
Awesome.
Would you like to see some of my trailer tricks?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So let's start off with a standard flipping jig. Okay, so one of my favorites that I'm fishing these days is the Greenfish Tackle Brandon Cobb. Okay, so first thing I do, Nick, I take this out of the pack and I got to tweak it. Okay, so I got to get my scissors. And I like one of the things I like with the way Greenfish builds a jig is they build a jig for a jig fisherman to modify the way he likes. And here's how I like to cut my weed guard. This is too long for me. See, right here's the top of my hook, Nick. Okay. And I got all this weed guard up here. So I want to shorten this, right? Now, I'm a little bougie on this, so I cut them on an angle. And I use my index finger here as a guide. See how I lay that hook there? It's not even with the top of my finger. It's down inside there, probably about 3/16 of an inch or so. And then I clamp that. See how I'm holding that, Nick? So now my finger becomes my cutting guide. So you can see the angle, right? So I'm going to trim that at that angle. And then my last strands there, Nick? I cut them back on themselves a little bit to kind of shorten them up. So these front strands are much shorter than this back strand. And then I kind of fan that out a little bit. And I don't like that weed guard much longer than the point of that hook. I could maybe make it a little longer there, but I like it a little long. I'd rather lose a couple jigs. Now, the next thing I do, now these are tied. Your Greenfish skirts are tied, which to me makes a little bit of a better jig. Keeps them in place, gives them a good flare, but I like a little more flare. So I'm going to split that jig skirt. You can see the tie there in the middle. I'm going to put the eye of that hook on that knuckle on my thumb. And everything that's out in front of that finger at the end of that thumb is gone. And what that does is it shortens those strands up and flares them. Now I'm going to come on the bottom side of the skirt. I'm going to hold that skirt together. I'm going to do the same thing. a little longer than the hook. I cut them at a little bit of an angle, kind of a V cut. And there's my properly trimmed skirt. Now, some of the things I can do with these trailers, Nick. If I want a nice big presentation, full length, big bluegills, big crawdads, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a scrap of worm, or if I'm using pork, this is super important.
Big time important.
With pork. Why is that, Mike?
What's that?
Why is it so important with pork?
Well, because the pork spins around, and you can't get zero penetration.
Yeah, that pork will slide down your hook shank, and then a lot of times on your hook set it'll flip around, and that skin will block that hook.
Blocks it. And you can't get anything through that.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a piece of worm on this shank.
They use a laser beam to punch holes in that, Nick.
About as side as that is, right? See where that hook starts to turn, Nick? That's about as long as I want that. And I'm just gonna cut that. And this is the real important part here. This has to go on the hook. Okay. Now this is ready for chunk style rigging. Okay. Now sometimes if the water's real dirty, real muddy, I'll put a chartreuse worm in the middle. But generally I just match it up. I usually pick something up off the floor of the boat. So if I'm going to do a standard chunk, one of my favorite combinations in water that's not super clear is a black and blue chunk on a green pumpkin jig. And I think I caught every fish in 2021 on the same jig.
Yeah.
Green pumpkin jig with a black and blue chunk. I'm going to come in. I'm going to punch it. So that's one way to rig a trailer, Nick. That gives me my biggest presentation, full body, full length, big profile. Okay? Now, if I want to take that same exact trailer and make it more compact, I'm going to take my little worm body off and I'm going to thread my trailer on. Okay? Thread it on down the middle there.
I don't think it's the best trailer for that jig. But
put it up over my keeper. Now I have a compact trailer. This will also skip really well because it's a flat trailer, Arky style head. So that's two modifications with the same trailer.
Yeah.
Right? So we can do the same thing by going to a bigger chunk.
Yeah.
We can get a bigger profile here.
And then your cross.
And we can do the same thing by going to a crawl style bait like a rage crawl.
George, before you move on from that chunk you just had in your hand.
Yep.
Explain to people, I thought this was cool when you did a YouTube video about it. Which side of the chunk are you putting in the hook first?
So when I do a standard chunk, this first chunk here was a missile bait D chunk, mini D chunk. And I agree with Mike. It's a little too small for this big jig, but it'll work.
That word, yeah.
Their legs are centered on their chunk, so I don't think it matters. But I'm kind of like from the school of Hank Parker, and Hank Parker always said you put your hook through the fat side of the chunk. Okay, a lot of people are going to hook their chunk on the skin side. So this is the fat, this is the skin. A lot of people hook their chunk on the skin side. I've always hooked my chunk on the fat side because that's what Hank Parker said to do. Right?
Who's got it?
Back in the day.
Go against that, Corbin?
Denny Brower.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people don't.
Just saying.
A lot of people hook it the other way. I don't know who does what, but I know the way Hank Parker rigs it, and I know the way yours truly rigs it.
Yeah.
And I can vouch for its effectiveness.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But that's the chunk style rigging, Nick. Of course, you can do the same thing with cross style rigging. And then you can vary, Nick, with your, like going to a pork.
Yep.
Okay. So while we're kind of talking about chunks and trailers and jigs and what have you, I mean, has anybody ever really seen a difference between plastic or pork or vice versa? Because yes, I have.
Well, I mean,
to the tune of a pretty nice check.
The only time I would say that I noticed it was, old school hair jig fishing, cold water.
Yeah.
That I think that's where the and I honestly think that it had a scent thing to it where the scent was it got down in that fat part of that chunk and it holds scent better. That's one thing about pork that you got to say it's much more porous, holds a lot more.
Plus it's all brined up. It's
yeah.
What do we look for
Salt.
in our plastic?
Salt,
Nick.
It's got the salt in it.
Salt, yeah.
I mean, I'm big on buying. Thank you, Bobby. I'm big on buying my plastics with salt in them. I think fish hold a salted bait. I think they hold that salted chunk. But there's something about that chunk, and I'll tell you, Mike, and I totally agree with your point because I mean, you and I have shared a boat on about 1,000 winter days, and back in the day, we fished a 101 pork chunk on a hair jig, right?
Yeah, forever.
And why do we do that?
Well, that's why we did it.
It's because Butch Ward told us to.
Butch Ward.
It's because Butch Ward told us to.
Yeah, Butch Ward.
It's because Butch Ward told us to, Mike, right?
Yeah.
So,
did you ever fish pork, Corbin?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So you're not too young for the pork?
No, man. I even did the whole take a knife and make the lighter side a little
modifications.
Wider. Oh yeah.
Did all the modifications on pork?
Yeah. And
we're gonna have to start teaching modifications on pork because it's all new for a lot of people.
I know.
Well, the best, and here's a quickie for you. The best pork versus plastic bite that I ever experienced was actually in a BFL, pre-fishing for a BFL, which I think at the time was still called a Red Man. So I might be going back a minute.
That is a minute.
And one of the competitors that I know pretty well, we were pre-fishing and it was all right.
Don't say Joe Thompson.
It wasn't great. But this fella came up to me and he goes, "Hey, you need to put a pork chunk on your jig." Because I pretty much fished a jig. My top 3 lures in those days were the jig, and then the flipping jig, and then the backup casting jig. And I had some topwater jigs. But anyways, he said, put a pork chunk on. I'm like, really? It's September. September's a tough month, right, Nick?
It is.
So, damn if I didn't dig out a jar of pork, rusted metal jar, glass jar, rusted metal lid, put a chunk of pork on, and it was like the Pied Piper. So, there's something to it. I've experienced it numerous times in my life. And, when I was at the ICAST show this year, and I was walking from one appointment to the next, I saw this big sign across the show floor. Big.
Did it say, "Welcome, George"?
It said, "Pork is back." And I'm like, what the hell? Yeah. I thought it was like a Mexican food truck or something, man. So I'm like, what the?
Oh, I'm going to run for that.
I don't know what's going on there. So,
street tacos, baby.
I think food truck's a sore subject at the moment.
I had to go that way.
Yeah.
So I worked my way across the show floor because I was going that way anyways. And here it was the Uncle Josh booth. And they explained how since they took the Uncle Josh pork off the market, and I knew it wasn't a sales pitch because I've heard it 1,000 times, and so is Mike, and so is everyone that works here. Where's the pork? What happened to pork? Why is there no more pork? We don't care if the price would have tripled. We don't care. Well, he heard it 1,000,000 times because he's the guy that owns the company. So he said, we're bringing it back. And I'll tell you what, the chunks are more, to me, they're more like dressed up.
They're more modernized.
They're not as. I mean, you bought a bar.
Here's a good point from
If you
Sean
bought a
Taylor.
bar, if you bought a jar of pork, before they took it off the market, 3 chunks would be nice, and 1 chunk would be like gnarly. You threw it away. These seem to be like tanned.
Well, Sean Taylor, he's saying that, back in the day, the plastics weren't as supple. So the pork was always the cold water go-to. I believe that. I mean, we had definitely plastics have come a long way over the years.
Well, look at Z-Man.
And the suppleness of them and definitely changed. But I mean, that's good. That's a good reason why some of these guys in cold water, that's another good reason why you did it, because it was supple, kept moving, and kept having the action.
Well, it was interesting when you guys said about, pork. I mean, we all relied on it when it was around. And then when it went away, there was this like little spot where it was like, what do we do?
Yeah.
And then you had to make what was on the market at the time work. I mean, if you were going to continue to throw a jig.
Yeah.
But now that I see that it's back, I'm like, that's awesome that things come back like that. And I'm glad to see it back.
Corbin.
Well, and let me tell you something. Adapt it to your game a little bit, especially in the spring.
Right.
Yeah. Corbin, I've always thought of you as a pretty decent jig fisherman. What's a setup that guys who are getting into jig fishing or are jig fishing that maybe just don't really do it much? What's a setup? What's a setup that you need to go to all the time?
Like rod, reel,
no,
jigs?
just a jig.
I mean,
just a jig setup and maybe a point or two, a couple of points that we should know that you think would make people want to throw a jig more.
There's like several that you got to look at. And I've been waiting for somebody to say something or ask a question about it. But like, this is the jig show, right?
Yeah.
Do you know who we have yet to talk about? The jig man.
Denny
Brower.
Oh, yeah.
Denny Brower, man. I mean, like arguably the greatest flipping jig of all time, right?
Yeah.
And here's why I'm bringing this up, right? We talk about reinventing the wheel, going back old school with the Uncle Josh pork rind, etc., right? But guess what this has that nobody has talked about today? Rattles. All the jigs nowadays, it seems like they've gone away from rattles, whereas early on they used to always have a lot of rattles, right? So to me, you got to have like a couple different setups. You can have your Bitsy Bug or your smaller profile, your Z-Man, your smaller profile. But like for me, one of the jigs that I like to talk about is like, dude, keep it simple, man.
Yeah.
Like, boom.
Yeah.
Right? Like it is not broken.
Yeah.
Okay. It still works. This jig still catches fish. I mean, George has, I don't know, 30 yards of jigs back there. George, you still carry this for one reason. Why? People buy it.
It's a great
fish,
jig,
right?
It's a great jig.
So, I'm not going to go on a whole tangent about the Denny Brower jig, but what I am going to say is, as somebody that's starting out, right, you can get caught up in the mop jig, which is a great jig. I love that jig, right? You can get caught up in the
which, by the way,
jigs, right? The Strike King structure jig. The mop jig has a rattle, right? But at the end of the day, you got to make sure you have a couple of the old school things in there, man, because they catch fish. A Bitsy Bug still catches fish, right?
Yeah.
Pro model jig still catches fish, right?
Yeah.
The new Z-Man jig, the David Walker, that's a hell of a jig. It catches fish. No rattles on it. Comes through cover great. But, for me, you got to keep it simple, man. Green pumpkin, black and blue. Don't be afraid to add a little bit of orange to the claws. Don't be afraid to go green pumpkin blue on your trailer so you get a little glitter on it if it's a sunny day. But long story short, that's what I go with. 60-degree style head, you're going to catch them.
See how they do that, boys?
So
they take a skirt rattle.
Yep.
So this is a collar. This is a great way to add rattles to your jig. This is a collar that's used to make a skirt.
Right.
And then they put that collar on the hook and put it over top of the keeper. And then they make rattles that fit into the little rabbit ears on the collar. And you can put 1 in or you can put 2 in. And you can add a rattle. That's one great way to add a rattle to any jig that you already have in your arsenal.
Yeah.
Those collars are a nickel and the rattles are a quarter a piece.
Well, and speaking of, the jig I mean, George, you guys also have the components here to build your own jig, right? I mean, you guys have the skirts, you have the heads and stuff. So, I mean, the ability to just kind of take and tweak a jig, add a little bit of flash here or there, it's something you got to have.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we covered the jigs and the weights and the colors pretty good. I want to touch on line again real quick. The consensus is that when you're flipping jigs, you're casting jigs, you're football fishing deep water with jigs, the line of choice is fluorocarbon.
Absolutely.
Which is, I think it's a great choice, but there's also the braid side of things.
Yes,
So there's
yes.
there's two different times to use that. I think it's an 85-15, Corbin.
85%
Fluoro.
15. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I would kind of go along with that. Fluoro is, of course, your densest line, sinks nice, and has the low stretch and has the sensitivity that you need to detect strikes. And it's invisible and it has a great abrasion resistance. But if you're going to use fluorocarbon and you're going to jig fish, you got to jig fit. You got to do it with shallow water fishing. You got to do it with heavy enough line.
Yeah,
you got and which would be what?
You mean fluorocarbon?
So
heavy enough fluorocarbon line. Yeah.
This sounds really crazy, but
it doesn't have to be shallow water.
No. Oh yeah, it does.
I keep it in rules of fives.
Huh?
So for me, jig fishing, I either use 10, which is very rare.
Yeah.
And if I do, I'm fishing deep. 15, which is common. 20 if I'm fishing, maybe around some barnacles or something. Or I go 50 or 65, and that's braid.
Yeah.
But I mean, Mike, I specifically remember a tournament that you and I fished together.
Yeah.
Okay. At a local lake where it was springtime and we were fishing gnarly bushes and trees.
Yeah.
And we should have won it. And the only way we could get bit was to flip a 3/4 ounce jig in 3 foot of water into the nastiest bushes that you could find.
Yeah.
That's not a fluorocarbon application. I mean, you may think it is, but
I don't think it is.
I mean, we were flipping 50 and 65-pound braid and setting the hook and literally winching them over trees.
Yeah.
I mean, there was to put it in perspective. I set the hook on this fish and we couldn't get to it. It was like a 5-pounder. We'd have won a tournament if we'd have landed it. It was literally hanging over a bush out of the water, and that wasn't long enough. So in those kinds of applications,
there is
you got to use
exactly,
braid.
exactly,
and you got to have.
And that's my point.
You got to have the thicker hook. You're going to up your weight because you're fishing in thicker cover.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And you got to get your trailer right because sometimes your smaller compact is going to drop quicker, whereas like a Super Chunk Junior, whereas your bigger one, your regular Super Chunk's going to fall slower. So you got to kind of see where you're at.
But on the line of keeping it simple, I think there's, like Corbin said, there's those instances where braid you just got to throw braid. I mean, I've been in those situations where braid, and I'm even thinking in like some grass situations where you're flipping in that heavy grass.
Now you're talking my language.
There's a lot of situations where you're in that heavy grass and you have to use braid. So I did some research on jig fishing today and I spent some time on it, and everybody that kind of was talking about jigs online was fluorocarbon. And I get that fluorocarbon is kind of like the thing in most situations. But in grass situations, I just don't get it.
Well, it depends on the grass. So
I don't get it.
It depends on the grass.
Well, it'd have to be
if it's clump grass.
It would have to be like eel grass or something like that.
Well, even if it's clump milfoil, but it's clumpy, it's not real thick, it's not real developed yet. Early season grass.
Yeah,
I'm 100% fluorocarbon.
Yeah.
But once you get into that thick,
that's
summer grass.
I don't know if you were listening, but that's what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I got you.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
So there's that time and place for that heavy line, and that's my point. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Can I add something? Okay. We were talking about fall rate earlier, and here's a prime example when we're talking about this kind of stuff. A 1/2 ounce jig on 20-pound fluorocarbon, okay,
Yeah.
is going to fall a lot slower than a 3/8 ounce jig on 50-pound braid.
I believe that.
So you need to like pay attention to these things, because if you, for instance, if you're on a 1/2 ounce jig flip and bite, right, and you're flipping into grass and you're setting the hook and you keep losing them and you're like, my God, I got to go to braid, you may need to flip back, no pun intended, to a 3/8 ounce jig to get that similar fall rate,
Same fall rate,
because you don't have as much resistance.
That's
in
a
the
good
water.
point.
And a lot of guys don't think about it. And Seth Feider, okay, actually uses, I mean, he uses a medium heavy rod, which is what we don't talk about.
Yeah.
He uses 30-pound braid.
Yeah.
It's a 20-pound fluorocarbon leader exclusively. I mean, that's what he does. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that we're having this discussion, because there's also that hybrid mix that you can look at doing as well.
80%, 85% of the people that I Googled today.
Yep.
And I researched fluorocarbon.
Right.
Maybe even more.
Right.
It was only 1 or 2 guys that even talked about braid.
Right.
And that was kind of really shocking to me, because I'm if I'm in shallow, super heavy cover, I'm flipping braid usually.
Yeah, not me.
I just usually am.
I hate braid on wood, on hardcover.
I know. I love it on
Yeah,
there.
for me, I'd almost have to be in a punching situation to have to go
I
to
throw in
braid.
there with freaking wood, and I saw that damn tree right in half and pull that fish right off that tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the big advantages to fluoro on hardcover that I think it's kind of an art form.
Kyle says
is
llama.
when you tighten up and you're kind of snagged, but you're not really snagged, the ability to pop that jig free, that works with one thing and one thing only, a little stretch in your line. And the advantage of that is when you pop that jig free, it keeps you in that cast. A lot of times it's attracting the attention of the fish. And not only that, you don't have to, if you get it free, you don't have to kind of ruin your spot. So I think on hardcover, if you look at percentages and the amount of successful cast versus unsuccessful cast, that there's no way anything on hardcover is better than fluorocarbon. Docks, trees, and rocks.
So I agree 100% with what George is saying, except in one tiny one-off situation, which you're going to know about. And that is like where you're going down and you're like, oh, no one's going to flip into there.
Yeah.
Or you're skipping these heavy overhang bushes that have like thorns and jaggers. I mean, but again, that's where I will go to the braid, but then I'm going to 65-pound.
Yeah.
And half the time it's just a reaction, because as soon as that jig hits the water and drops, you're getting bit, because guess what? Every other boat on the bank, with the exception of George Acord, isn't going to flip into there. You know what I mean? George, do you agree with that on that?
I mean, that's a great illustration of when to use that braid.
The only time on hardcover.
I mean, it's probably.
Yeah.
And, on the grass side of things, when you get into that full-blown summer, and I see a great comment here from Paul Batters, if it's not hydrilla, I'm throwing fluoro. Right. That's kind of what I'm saying. One of the things that's really overlooked in jig fishing is flipping thick grass.
Right.
Henceforth, the invention of the punch skirt.
Right.
Yeah.
So the punch skirt was built to make your bait look like a jig. Well, the way I make my bait look like a jig is I tie on a jig. That's my punch skirt.
He was going here.
My punch skirt is a jig.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a different fall. There's a connection to the hook. There's some things there.
Right.
Now there are times when that punch weight is gonna.
I was just gonna say
annihilate that jig.
When it's too thick, that punch.
But in shallow water,
that thing is the deal.
That freaking jig, flipping grass is lethal.
Yeah.
There's times when that punch rig, and I can't wait till we do a punching show, but there's times when that punch rig is gonna with the skirt is gonna beat the jig.
Yeah.
But there's times when that jig is gonna beat that punch rig.
Yeah.
Right.
And I really like the jig when the grass is, when I'm seeing clumps, when I can define this clump, that clump.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are watching the show right now, this is probably one of the points I really want to get across. I mean, just picture yourself standing on the front of your boat on this grass edge for however long, a mile, acres, football fields, and you're literally flipping your jig into a clump, reeling it in and flipping it to the next clump. And in that situation, you're probably going to be using a 3/4 ounce jig because you have to overcompensate for the bulk of the jig by going up in weight.
Right.
And for those of you up north on natural lakes, freaking killer. And I want to leave you with this thought.
Uh-oh.
Up north.
Uh-oh.
Black on black.
Yeah.
One area we didn't get into was football jigs. And this is important. So we talked about flipping jigs. We talked about the Arky style. We talked about this. We talked about that. But the football jig is a totally different monster. And
just so happen to have one
yeah,
handy.
The football jig is your offshore structure orientated jig. In other words, you're going to fish this on rock, piles, shoals.
This is the Carolina
humps.
rig of jigs.
Absolutely. And what I want you guys to really understand here about this football jig is the presentation. The presentation is everything. It's not, you're not fishing this jig like you would a regular jig, hopping it along the bottom. This is a dragon jig. It's what it's designed to do. It's a side arm sweep where you're throwing out and you're reeling down and you're sweeping the rod to keep the bait on the bottom. This is where you're going to slide down in line size. You're going to go into the 15-pound.
You're fishing almost like a Carolina rig.
That's exactly right. And that's where I see a lot of people fishing football jigs on structure, and they're and you're going to get bites, but you're really going to get bites if you just drag it along, because the football jig is designed with the football style head. So when you start dragging it, it lifts up. And then as it goes across the rock, it kicks that tail and makes the action of that tail do what it's supposed to do. And so I wanted to touch base on that to make sure you know that this is a deep water technique. You're going to use a lot of 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce sizes with this system. And you're going to drag it like a Carolina rig.
Yeah, so when you drag that football jig, the interesting thing about a football jig, and we almost always fish a crawl style trailer on a football jig when we're dragging offshore structure. So we might be dragging a point, we might be dragging a hard spot, we might be targeting a hard spot on a point.
Well, the size is
could be a shell bed.
As the size again is the bait you're fishing, the temperature of the water, because the other football trailer, which I'm surprised you didn't put on there, was the creepy crawler.
Yeah, so we're either gonna go with a crawl style, what I would call a creature style bait, like this big bite crawl here, or a twin tail. So we're gonna do a twin tail grub. So but the interesting thing, what Mike's talking about with the football and what makes it so great for dragging structure is this wide head stays upright. And when it contacts something and you tension it, it rocks up. So it rocks up so you can sit there and literally rock this thing up on your target before you hop it over the target and continue your drag. So to Mike's point, we usually fish 1/2 to 3/4, probably heavy on a 3/4.
More so on the 3/4, I think, than anything. But there again, you can be fishing a nice shoal that drops from 10 to 12, and you want to, it's 10 foot on top, 12, 14 on the side. that's where a half ounce might work a little better for you. So there's, the half and 3/4 is what you're going to be carrying mostly in your box. So there again, you don't need a lot of them.
No.
You need a couple of colors. It's all crayfish presentation. There's no shad presentation. This is a crayfish technique, period. You don't have to worry about anything else. The size of the trailer you'll mess with. One of the more popular trailers too, or not a popular, but one that's very effective is the creepy crawler. Is a twin tail type of bait. It's a really good. It sinks fast. It gets down deep. It holds the bottom well. And this is about holding the bottom, dragging the bait, and that's what football jig fishing is: dragging and holding the bottom. On that, Nick, you throw it much?
I do, and I wanted to say with anybody that's new to jig fishing is on hard structure. What I always found was, you can definitely see this with like a 360 or the Panoptics, is when you can see that structure, and you can almost tell when your jig hits that structure. The worst thing people do is they set the hook. They think they got a bite. If they don't have experience, this is where you need a good rod.
Yeah.
Good sensitivity, because a lot of times if you just hop that jig over that structure or just give it a little, movement, that'll trigger that fish to bite. But if you set the hook, you're going to take that jig way outside the strike zone and you're done.
There's 2 rods that you're going to use for this mostly, and it might be some controversy over it, but you're going to use a 7-foot medium heavy or a 7.2 medium heavy rod for this. And that's going to cut, because you don't want to go heavy action, because you're only going with 12 or 15 pound test.
Right.
So you need a little bit of tip to give a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with a 7-foot rod. People are like, man, these 7-foot rods are too short. 7 foot is a long rod. It is. So a 7-foot medium heavy fast taper or a 7.2 medium heavy. And you don't have to go to the heavy on these. You want to stay medium heavy, because a lot of time these football heads, George, they have smaller hooks in them.
Yeah, they have a lighter wire hook, because a lot of times you'll make a long cast. Mm-hmm. So you got all that line out there. You got that stretch you're dealing with.
Yeah.
A little bit of stretch, a lot of line out there. So they'll go to a little bit of a lighter hook. And if you go to a big flipping type rod, that hook's going to flex out on you.
Yeah.
During the battle. The biggest thing with the football jig is it's just such a great way to kind of feel that bottom around. Maybe you graft an area and you found something, maybe bait, or maybe you actually marked fish. Maybe they're on a point. Maybe they're on a ledge. A great way to kind of feel around out there.
Yeah.
Is to launch a football jig out and kind of feel around a little bit. And maybe there's a hard spot, which is what these fish are going to center on. And you can identify it with your football jig. And now you have your lineup for your cast, because it's all going to be about that cast angle. And that football is going to kind of make that difference for you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to want to have some half and some 3/4 football jigs in your jig box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Got anything else, Corbin?
No.
Some knowledge bombs.
I got all kinds of stuff.
Do you fish a football jig much?
Sometimes. I actually try to go with the lighter if fish are suspended, because at half the time they eat it on the fall. Half the fish that I catch on a football jig come on the initial drop.
Yeah.
So, that's one of those things where if you see them not on the bottom, but a little off the bottom, you might want to go to that half ounce and make that long cast and go from there. Obviously, a rage crawl is a heck of a bait on the back. Baby rage.
Tremendous
Menace,
trailers.
So,
what do you got, Nick? Anything?
Yeah, there is a jig setup that, again, if anybody's new out there to fishing, or even so, I might even make a guy mad because he kind of brought this up on a comment. The Kitech casting jig with a tender little morsel trailer on the back, like the tantrum they got here, is perfect if anybody wants to just catch a fish.
Yeah.
And these jigs all catch big fish. That's what's cool about a jig. But my question to you guys was, you go in your box, What is your most confident jig and trailer combination?
Corbin?
Depends on where I'm fishing. I got it. I mean, I know George's.
I got it. I could fish one jig everywhere I go.
See, I can't because smallmouth are one and largemouth are another.
Okay, so you're on the river.
For smallmouth or for
smallmouth.
or where there's some greenies around.
No,
I mean,
you're
I'm
on the river.
Like I said, I'm
fishing
ready.
for smallmouth. And it's
am I
You
flipping
don't,
or
you
am
don't
I
understand the
offshore?
question, Corbin?
I don't. I
he
don't.
needs to be a politician.
I don't.
Yeah.
Can I go?
I don't because if I'm flipping, I'm doing one. If I'm offshore, I'm doing another.
That's not the question, Corbin.
Can I go?
So if I'm flipping, I'm going to use the Z-Man, right?
You're not allowed to have two.
Power finesse. But if I'm offshore, I'm going to throw the Strike King baby structure jig.
Love that jig.
So Nick, last year I fished reservoirs, I fished shallow river, I fished tidal water. I kind of fished it all. And I literally had one jig tied on my primary jig rod for the whole year. I caught one tournament that Mike and I fished. I caught multiple limits of fish that we all called out. Now, you know, the jig is known for big fish. Every fish I caught was called out. Okay. And this jig was a 1/2 ounce black. Now I tie my own jig skirts on my go-to jig. It's a black strand with blue metal flake. It's not, I'm not winning any beauty contest with it, but I mean, my favorite jigs are, I fish a couple different jigs, but I like that greenfish jig. They don't make that color skirt, so I make my own. And it's a black strand with blue metal flake in it. And on that particular jig that I caught them all on, I had the black strand with the blue metal flake and a green pumpkin chunk. And I use my favorite chunk is the Zoom Ultra Vibe speed chunk. I fish it either punched like a pork chunk, like we just went over. I just take the same jig. You know, we just did, right, Nick? I punch it or I thread it. And everywhere I go, this is my go-to jig. I rest my case. And Nick, I paid for 2 boats with this jig.
There you go.
That's impressive. It's hard to bet against that.
I made my boat payments for 2 boats with this jig.
Mike, what do you got?
Well, I mean, me and George fished together, so I usually pick up his rod because it's all rigged up.
Hey, that's a good way to go.
But really, I mean, I like if I'm just going fishing somewhere, I like a green pumpkin 3/8 ounce jig, and I'll put the same trailer on the back that
Ultra
Vibe speed crawl, and then I'll mess with like chartreuse tips on the end or orange tips on the end. But that's pretty much my basic setup. Pretty much everywhere, unless the water's really dirty, then I'm right with George on the black and blue. And we fished a lot of dirty water this year.
Well, and we do, and
we fished a lot of dirty water, and those particular days where he was whacking them on that, it was chocolate.
And we'll make that same jig work just by changing our trailer. So one of the trailers that we fish a lot when we're in tidal water and it's dirty is sapphire blue.
Yeah,
we'll put the sapphire blue on. We'll put the black with the blue metal flake on, or we'll put the green pumpkin on.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll tell you what, try it. Follow the tips that we talked about, how to rig them, how to trim them, you know, master your pitching and your flipping, you know, get your casts, you know, pull up to your favorite lake, go out, find a nice lay down or 2 on the bank and practice getting those casts. On a lay down, work from the outer edge in. You don't want to flip into the juiciest part of the lay down right away and catch one, because if there's fish out on the outside, you're going to spook them all up. So work your way in, practice your flipping, get your pitching under control, get nice presentations, nice accuracy, get that drop, let it drop on a slack line, semi, so you can watch it. You're going to get almost all your bites on the drop. Employ some of these tips that Corbin gave, that Mike gave, that we gave, That cameraman Nick threw a couple jewels out there.
Well, the big thing was we wanted to emphasize to keep it simple. I mean, we talked about a lot of different things, but you can really keep it simple. And if you look at the pile of stuff that we held up here, it was black, it was green pumpkin. I mean, seriously, that's how simple it can be. You know, there's some bluegill stuff that you want to maybe mess with.
I used one jig. How much simpler can I
know.
get?
That's what I'm trying to,
man.
That's the point I'm trying to make. You can really keep it simple. There's a lot that you can go from there. What, Corbin?
I mean,
all right, Corbin, I got to put you on the spot then.
Go ahead.
We're going to put you on the spot. We need a direct answer. So it's springtime because a lot of guys are going to be going down here soon. It's springtime. It's one of the first tournaments or whatever down at the flats. What jig combination are you having on?
I'm going to go smallmouth fishing on the river.
I mean, you can't do it. Though.
I mean, no,
you just can't.
No,
do it.
I'm gonna have a black and blue with a rattle on. Probably, honestly, I'm probably gonna put a Denny Brower on, just because it's gonna be dirtier water, and probably like a full size super chunk or something along those lines. But I mean, for those of you guys that are listening, you know, you may be going out on a lake that's a little bit cleaner water, and you may have to start with a green pumpkin. So like you have to factor in everything that we said. Mix the conditions, you know, like the time of year.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be people that just don't even start fishing until May. And so you got to like factor all these things in. But one thing I will say is you're going to catch more fish after the show. I mean, I can promise you that.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is to the people is try to keep it simple.
Right.
Don't go crazy. The nice thing about jig fishing is, like, I think Nick said it earlier. You can make a jig look a lot different just by putting a different piece of plastic on the back.
Yes.
Maybe it was Corbin. It might have been Corbin or Nick. You can do a lot with the plastics on the back, and that's a whole nother show, I think.
The size of the jig.
Well,
it really is. I mean, you got the size of your trailer, you got
size of the jig,
you got crawfish, you got Greg Heckney's one of his top ones is the menace grub,
right,
on a jig.
And one thing I want to say is, like, the warmer the water, don't be afraid to go with a faster the fall rate.
Exactly.
You know, like, and
exactly.
I know we talked about slowing down the fall rate in the spring, but I mean, you can get a reaction just by flipping the jig. Like for me, I use a jig as a reaction.
Absolutely.
Bait.
And you know, the water temperatures start warming up, and you got to realize you might be going down a bank where 10 guys fished it already, you know? So, and you know, a lot of people won't throw a 3/4 ounce jig. They just won't do it.
Well, a full size jig, you know, has a much bigger profile, obviously, but make no mistake about it. You will catch a bunch of small fish on a standard size jig.
Yeah,
a bunch.
A bunch.
I can just tell you from my own experience. You also catch a bunch of studs on it.
Just make sure of one thing, you know, keep it simple and throw the damn thing and throw it a lot.
Well, you can't go wrong.
Don't just pick it up and throw it for 10 minutes. If you want to commit to this, do like I'm going to do for next year. My resolution.
I thought you were going to say you had a revelation.
Well, I had a revelation. My resolution next year is crankbaits. I'm going to throw the son of a bitch until I figure it out. Because I am not a good crankbait fisherman. I'm going to figure it out.
Mikey Fritz in the house, baby. He got a fusion trouble.
Right on, bro.
Gotta have a goal.
Yep.
It's 2022.
Yep.
We're about to hit the water. In some parts of the country, they're full swing, but we're not. We're in full ice.
What do we got new, George? Some tackle stuff. Let's talk some tackle a little bit.
Yeah. Give me a little tackle music.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I want. I thought you were going to give me that riff from our guitar guy.
I don't have that.
You don't have that loaded up?
Here's one. What's hot?
What's hot? Yeah. So, speaking of crankbaits.
Yeah.
Maybe you heard.
Yeah, I have.
The Haute Defoe Slim, OG Slim.
Yeah.
Big crankbait.
That's an OG 4?
6.
6.
Well, they have a tiny OG.
Okay.
It's the OG 4.
Right.
The tiny
Yeah.
OG. Oh, why? Looky here.
Well, you have one?
What? I got more than one, bro. The Rapala tractor trailer pulled into SFT today.
Let me see one of them mothers. Holy shitski.
So what we got
I'm
here,
excited about this one.
This is
Big
going to
time.
be.
we got the OG 4.
I know you are, Corbin. I know
This
you
is
are.
my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Ah, there's Don Roeder. He is a cranking machine, too. So look at this bad boy. This is the 4. Let's get the 6 out.
God, that
The
thing-
6, that's the original one, right, George? Or is that
Yep.
a deeper dive?
Nope.
Yeah.
This
Look
is
at
a
that
6.
thing, man.
And that's the 4.
Man, they're nice.
So the 6 is the original size, and it's a beautiful size. I mean, it's a nice, shad size. The 4 has been trimmed down,
George, look at them hooks on that. Those are impressive hooks on that. I'm just.
Oh, yeah.
VMC.
I just want to throw that out there. 'cause
VMC.
This ain't no OG Bill Lewis.
No.
Well,
no.
no, Bill
Uh-uh.
Lewis uses.
I know they upgraded them now. But
No, they use Mustad triple grips.
Yeah, but I'm saying when you look at those,
No,
the bait's
that's-
impressive, and the hooks that are on it are
They're
impressive.
VMC. So Rapala is owned by Normark, and Normark owns VMC.
Very nice, Corbin.
So they are, yes, very sharp, very nice. VMC hardware, circuit board lip, OG Slim 4.
In the house.
Yeah. So we've been waiting on that bad boy. There's also some new colors.
I can't believe you didn't tell me about it. You
I-
just like
It's a surprise, bro.
quiet, man.
It's a surprise.
I'm excited about that thing.
It's a surprise. Now you know.
All of our customers were waiting forever for that thing.
Well, here it is. So that's what I got for you as far as like my pick of the day.
Yeah.
My pick of the day is a crankbait. We're kind of crankbait crazy. Look at that thing, Nick. Now that is let me give you some stats here, Nick. I'll tell you what, Nick. This big one here is a 1/2 ounce. The OG6. This little guy here, 5/16.
Son.
So damn near 3/8, right?
You can throw that son of a gun.
I don't
Yeah.
know where you did your math studies at, but it's pretty close to 3/8. But it's not. It's 5/16. So we will do as soon as the ice gets off the water, we will do an OG Slim test. We're going to do a 4 versus 6, and we're going to give it a full run on the water
Which
testing
we do all the time.
because we like that.
What do you got here for you want to
Oh, next week, I have television viewing, live viewing recommendations for you, our wonderful audience. The MLF Pro Circuit is kicking it off at Rayburn.
Oh God.
So, yeah, Rayburn. I mean, bucket list, Hogtown, USA. January the 27th, the tournament starts. And an SFT favorite by the name of Gray Buck will be there. And he's
Cody
ready.
Pike. And Cody Pike.
Cody?
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of people we know that are going to be there. But Gray Buck was just here for Bass Fest, and we got to spend a couple days with him. So we're going to be, cheering him on. So the 27th, get your viewing devices wired up. And, don't plan on anything that day because we're going to be watching some live. And guess what? The season's back, baby.
Love it.
We're back, baby.
We're back.
God almighty. I didn't think I was going to make it.
Now you can
holiday.
hear Spike Stoker.
Yeah.
Well, Go ahead, Corbin.
And then shortly after that, we have something else we'll have to celebrate on Tackle Shop Live, which I'll have to throw that cliffhanger out there, and we'll talk about that then.
Yeah. Oh, and I think you're thinking of a
another one of Corbin's great mysteries.
We have a couple things to celebrate. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Okay, peeps.
Well,
thanks for tuning in tonight.
My birthday's the 28th of January.
Oh, I need pick up on it.
That's next week. We'll have a birthday party for next week.
Be careful, there might be a cake.
Well, we had it. The other thing we want to say is we had a great Bass Fest. It was all good. Thank you so much. It was a fun time. We enjoyed it. Everybody seemed to enjoy it. So make sure you come next year. If you didn't come, sorry for your loss. It was fun. Our next show, don't forget, is Smallmouth Saturday, February the 12th. You are welcome to come and hang out with us. And
it's going to be a big day.
That's going to be a fun day. We always have a good time.
We're going to have the big heated tent up out front with a floor in it for your viewing comfort.
Yep.
And we're going to have all kinds of great activities going on that day.
Yep. And then March sometime is
whoa. We can probably get March, a little more precise than that.
I think it's March,
sometime in March.
March the 12th, I think it is.
My God.
Hey,
George will get it.
Mikey, guess what I'm doing this Saturday?
What?
January 22nd.
18 to 19, Mike.
I'm coming down to hang out with you boys.
Corbin's going to be here
all day Saturday.
All day Saturday.
March
so
the
talk fishing.
March the 18th and 19th.
March the 18th and 19th is Cabin Fever.
Is our 30th year of Cabin Fever sale, which is just a great time. Lots of great products on sale. It's our biggest sale event of the year. You're going to want to stop by for that. So I don't have anything else. You guys good?
No, I'm good.
Nope.
We talked about the jigs.
Yep. I hope that works out for you.
We talked about some new crankbaits.
Yep.
We talked about some upcoming events.
Yep.
We talked about some tournaments coming up. Let's go. Let's go 2022.
All right. Thank you again.
Gone.
Thank you guys for stopping by another edition of Tackle Shop Live. We'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping.
Sunny day, right there you took my breath away. Young and pretty, was it just a dream? The next day you called me up, you told me I'm your little buttercup. You came over and you fell into my arms. Well, I know what I feel. Please tell me your love is real. You make me smile when I think of you. If I am down low and I am blue, I can't get enough. You make me happy, I feel so fine. Oh, how I wish that you were mine. I can't get enough. Hopeless lover. I woke up all soaked in sweat, with chills running down my neck. I'm going crazy from just the thought of you. A long blonde hair and your beautiful smile. Your sense of humor makes it all worthwhile. Don't make me wait, it's not a funny game. You know just what I feel. Please tell me